All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being with us on the program today. I'm Sam Rohrer, and we are wanting to stay right on time. I'm going to tell you just a little bit of a layout or the roadmap for the program today, and let you know up front that the program is going to be recorded. We will distribute it and some links that'll be included within this from our panelists once this is concluded. And it'll be our intent to either put it on our website at AmericanPastorsNetwork.net, or we may put that in the mail to you in the same way you got this invitation. But in any regard, we're glad that you are here with us. We're on unusual days, as you all know. The pulpit is faced with unusual challenges. And we know that you're in that space, and certainly when it comes to, as we're entitled this program, Regathering the Church, purposely did not use the word reopening our church, because I hope you never actually shut your church. But we are regathering, and in these days, we need the counsel and the wisdom of those who are in that space to help theologically, legally, all of that, and that's what we're going to try and put together in the program today. I will proceed here at the moment because we are going to want to conclude no later than 70 minutes. So that's an hour and 10 minutes. We will be done one way or the other, and if we can, we'll conclude before that. To begin, and I'll lay out some rules just afterward, just so you know, but I'm going to ask right now Pastor Todd Johnson. He's with the Emmanuel Baptist Church in Philadelphia. Ask him to open this call in prayer. And so if you would, Todd, please open us in prayer, and then we'll begin the program.
Certainly. Good morning to everyone. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Father, I pray now in your name, Lord, as these men and churches that are represented here throughout the state, as we come together for enlightenment and wisdom, as we balance this regathering process in our churches. And we pray, Lord, that we might continue to heed your call, understanding that we want to act biblically and we want to respond from a biblical worldview. We thank you for Sam and his leadership, and we pray, Lord, that throughout the course of this webinar, that you would give us insight and that we might be a help and a resource to not only our churches, but to other churches who might be struggling during this regathering process. So Lord, now we pray that everything that is shared today, that we might gain wisdom and insight. And we thank you in advance for what you're going to do in this time of sharing. And it's in your name we do pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Brother Todd. And we may hear just a word from Brother Todd at the end if we have enough time. This is what we're going to do here right now. I'm going to be introducing Mat Staver in just a moment. His picture was on the invite, so you're aware that Matt is with us. Then we're going to go to Kyle Johnson, who is a corporate attorney with Brotherhood Mutual. And then I'm going to be speaking to Dr. Gary Dull, who you would know, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Pastors Network. And he's going to give us an insight at the end with what he and about 20 other pastors and churches in Southwest Pennsylvania are going to be doing relative to regathering. We'll hear just a little bit from Brother Denny Mallonee, who's up in Beaver Springs, right in the middle part of the state, briefly, and then we'll conclude and wrap up the program after that. Now, all of you who are watching, this is how we're going to do this. If you have questions that come up in your mind as we move through the program, go to the bottom of your screen, take your mouse and hover over the bottom of your screen that's open. You'll see there a thing for Q&A. In that Q&A, then pose your question. Keep it brief, put it down. I will then look at these, and then I will pose, consolidate, or however it needs to be, and we'll direct those questions to the previous guests. So we'll have questions for Matt when he's concluded. We'll have questions for Kyle when he's concluded, and then we'll have some general things, if you have them, that can be posed to Gary or myself, or however, as we get to the end of the program. So that's pretty much how we're going to go. So do that. That'll be an efficient way to take and follow. If you need to perhaps chat with me briefly, privately, not publicly, you can do that in the chat option that is there at the bottom of the screen. Okay, let me go ahead and begin to keep us rolling and on time. I'd like to introduce right now Mat Staver. Most of you who are on this call would recognize Mat Staver. Matt leads Liberty Baptist, not Liberty Baptist, although he was at Liberty College, Liberty University for a while as the dean of the school there. But Matt is a pastor. He is an attorney, and he's been in a very, very important space of protecting religious freedom and a host of constitutional rights that are important to all of us who find ourselves in the position of Christian leaders, or even those in the space of just being citizens wanting to be God-fearing and live according to our Constitution. So Matt is in that space. He's written a lot of books. I'm not going to do a whole lot more about him. You can go to their website, libertycounselLC.org. LC.org is where you can find out for information. So Matt, right now, thank you for taking time. You're a very busy schedule here right now. I know that, but thank you for being with us. Go ahead and lay out some of the guidelines and some foundational principles that you think will be helpful to pastors, again, primarily here in Pennsylvania, but not exclusively, but primarily pastors here in Pennsylvania, as we're looking at regathering and calling our fellowships back to physical worship.
Well, thank you, Sam. It's good to be with you, and good morning to all of you from Pennsylvania and other areas that are viewing today. For those of you in Pennsylvania, there's good news, because in the executive order, it actually states that churches are essential functions. There is a provision that suggests, it just recommends, but it's not required, that the services find alternatives, or religious leaders find alternatives to in-person gatherings. However, the fact of the matter is the in-person gatherings are permitted because churches are classified as essential functions and essential activities. A number of states are doing the same thing. Florida actually led the way in that after a pastor that we represented was wrongfully arrested. On April 1, the Florida governor indicated that churches were essential. Attending churches, synagogues, and houses of worship was essential activity, and then preempted all of the other local counties to the contrary. So it was uniform across the state. Other states are doing the same thing, but in some states, you still have 0 in-person based on the executive orders, or 10 people and other kinds of things. We have been litigating those kinds of cases around the country. And just briefly, before I go into some of the principles and foundations, on Saturday afternoon, we got a major victory, 3-0 at the Federal Court of Appeals regarding a Kentucky church where it was having some limited in-person meetings, far and wide, socially distanced. and a parking lot service, and some police officers came and gave notices of quarantine to everybody who was in their car for the parking lot service. And then they got a letter from the governor to go into self-quarantine. We filed suit. Eventually, on Saturday afternoon, 3-0 decision, the Federal Court of Appeals came down with a very strong decision in our favor. We are litigating in Virginia, where they have a 10-person limitation, and they have cited a pastor there criminally for having 16 people in a 293-seat sanctuary. This church does not have internet. Many of the people that they serve do not have internet. The Department of Justice of the United States has weighed in on that as of Sunday afternoon and filed a statement of interest or brief in support of our position. And we're in other states as well. We're literally working in about 40 states, not all in litigation, but working with pastors all over the country. Let me just say this. I'm glad that Pennsylvania has declared churches essential, but whether the state declares churches essential or not, churches have always been essential. And now they're more essential than ever, as you well know. When this began, and the statistics have now borne this out, since we've had these lockdowns, there's been a dramatic, and I mean dramatic, increase in domestic violence, child abuse, child sexual exploitation, online child pornography, alcohol consumption of illegal drugs and prescription drugs for depression and anxiety, and other kinds of different kinds of conditions. There has been an increase in suicide. If you talk to law enforcement, they're getting many more calls for domestic violence than ever before. And it just stands to reason that this would happen. People are locked in their places. They are not able to go out. Many of them have lost their jobs. They're uncertain about what's happening with their income. They're looking at whether they can feed their families, whether they can pay the rent, pay the car payment, and so forth. And there's a lot of stress that's out there right now. Now more than ever, churches are essential, and those kinds of things cannot be done online. As many people as can be reached online, you can't feed a person online. You can't sit down across them and pray with them and even put your hand on their shoulder and just let them know that the Lord loves them. So churches are more essential than others, than ever at this time. What we have done is we created a website, and it's called reopenchurch.org. You can also get to it from our main webpage, which is lc.org, Liberty Counsel's webpage, lc.org. The scrolling icon at the top has that information for what we had called Reopen Church. And we have been looking at May the 3rd, and a number of churches around the country began the process. And I want to emphasize that, began the process. And others are beginning the process this coming Sunday and later in the month of May to begin the process of in-person services. So on that particular page, we have a legal memorandum. We're going to update it with some of the new victories that we just won that I mentioned to you over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. But we also have a suggested worship options. Let me talk about that first. The suggested worship options is to begin to turn the corner and include some form of in-person worship service, and combine that, if possible, with a parking lot service, and combine that, if possible, with an online service. In other words, have all of those options available, or all of the options that you're able to do, but begin the process of turning the corner to have in-person services. We also have a list of suggested safety matters to follow, and we have a number of points there, 26 different points with different citations. Below that, we also have a mega church, Crossroads Church, just outside of Dallas. They were planning to begin opening on Mother's Day, but this is a church and a pastor that we've known for many years. They looked at our website and they decided that they were going to start, and they did on May the 3rd, this past Sunday. It is a mega church. It's a multi-thousand member church. They have a lot of different facilities, a lot of different campuses. But what they did was they took some of our material and they actually added to it, and they actually modified some of that for their own purposes. What they did is this, and you'll see two links there. One is a link at the bottom of that. In fact, if you go to reopenchurch.org, you'll see at the top of that page the safety suggested measures. Click on that, and that's where you're going to get these 26 points to help you think through how do you reopen and yet protect the health and safety, as we all want to do, of the people that you serve. So that's there. And at the bottom of that are the links to the Crossroads Church. And I put that there just because it is very informative. So what they did was they took, like I said, some of our material, they expanded it. They actually put photographs. Now, this would certainly be okay for a mega church, but not necessarily for the smaller churches. But the ideas are still there. And what they did was they actually, if you click on, if you go up, scroll back up, if you will, to the top, and click on the thing that says worship and safety measures. Click on that. This will take you to the page that gives you worship ideas, and then there's the safety measures that are suggested. And if you scroll down, there's 26 different points for you to consider as you're going through that process. And at the very bottom, you'll see, by way of example, it says, consider the webpage of Crossroads Church overviewing its reopening procedures. That's where its procedures are. As a part of its reopening plan, Crossroads also created a registration page. So what they did was they actually created a registration page. They had 2 services, I believe, on Sunday, and you could go to the registration page and you could register for each, whichever one of those services was available. And if one was full, then you would go to the other one. You also had different locations where they had the main auditorium, the theater, and the Spanish church. So they were using all these different venues in Texas. And they had, as you see, 10 o'clock, 11:30 for each one of those, except for the Spanish one. They had, for those that were Spanish-speaking people, they had one service there at 11:30. So they had some really good creative ideas that I want to just recommend that you consider. And obviously, there's no one template. And that's one of the problems with some of these orders, is that they have a one-size-fits-all. 500,000 churches in the United States, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox. They're small, they're large. They have different demographics in terms of age, some primarily older, others mixed, some younger. You have a lot of different variations. There is no one-size-fits-all. There is no magic Sunday that you ultimately open on. You, as a pastor in your church leadership, are obviously in the best position to determine when and how to begin that process of reopening and having this gathering at your church as an in-person. So I'm not saying you need to do this. I'm just saying these are options for you to think through, because I'm not going to make the same mistake as I think some of these orders have done, frankly, all of the orders, treating all churches identical. For example, there are some churches, my parents-in-law live in Oklahoma. Yes, they have internet, but no, they can't download a video. They wouldn't be able to watch it. Many people don't have internet. Churches that we represent, some of them are inner city churches. And the people that they work with don't have that smart tablet or smartphone. So there is no one size fits all. There never has been. So you take that and you modify it to your own idea, and feel free to use whatever you want to. You can borrow it. We're not going to restrict you in any way. Use it however you wish. But it is to begin the process of reopening. Rather than go down through all of those bullet points, I will point you to that, because it's going to be easier for you to look at that. And then, Sam, we can have a few moments for some Q&A where people can ask questions. And I'd rather right now just kind of move to that, if you don't mind, and we can have Q&A and maybe touch on a few of these points.
Okay, Matt, thank you very much. Excellent. And ladies, I mean, all of you are watching, again, that site that was put up there, go there. That is very helpful. We have one question that came in, and I'll rephrase it. It came in early on. It says, so does that mean that we can immediately now meet for public worship? All right, now that was the question. I'm going to phrase it and add this to it, Matt, from this perspective. Here in Pennsylvania, because of what the governor has said, certain counties are actually viewed differently than other counties. There are some restrictions that are in some, so it's not even a statewide uniformity. How do pastors go about considering those types of things in what we're talking about?
That's a good question. Obviously, where this statewide order applies, unlike Florida, which preempted the whole field, you're saying that in Pennsylvania, some of the counties have stricter regulations. And if you're in obviously one of the counties that don't, yes, you can begin in-person services. And what we're recommending is not go back immediately, obviously, to the way you were before. But that's why we have the safety measures for those in-person services, to do limited in-person services. And then obviously give opportunities for others who do not want to be there or cannot be there or should not be there. All that's listed in that material. But that would be social distancing, sanitization, all of that material is laid out. If you're in a county, however, that says you can only have 10 people, as an example, you can do one of two things. One is you can begin the in-person service with at least the minimum of 10 and add that to your online. Have something that actually begins the process. On the other hand, if, and each pastor and each church has to make this decision. And I preface it by saying this: none of these orders on churches are constitutional. The government does not have the constitutional authority to dictate to churches the form and manner of worship. You have to do it online, or you can only do parking lot, or you can only have 10. There are cases where that's putting a limit on it, where they don't put limits on secular gatherings, like Walmart, Kmart, Home Depot. We all know the different big box stores, is unconstitutional. Churches and pastors are going to want to voluntarily take safety measures, as we all should. No question about it. We're not going to be reckless. We're not advocating being reckless. But they don't have the constitutional right to do any of these orders. And some of the courts have clearly expressed that, and the Department of Justice has now confirmed that with the filing in our case over the weekend, with its very clear statement. So that is a decision to you. And here's the question. You know, I have this issue of Romans 13, 1 Peter 2 coming up a lot. Romans 13, and I won't go much into that, but Romans 13 is governments are established by God to protect law and order, for law and order, to protect the good and punish the evildoer, and by your good behavior, silence those who would ultimately try to use your behavior against the gospel. Romans 13 is one of the most abused passages through Christian history, and the Nazis certainly used Romans 13 beginning in 1933. But there's other verses in the scripture, and that is Jesus said, "Render to Caesar that which belongs to Caesar," Matthew 22:21, "and to God that which belongs to God." Acts says we must obey God rather than man. The government does not have jurisdiction over the church. Just as in the Old Testament, the king didn't have jurisdiction over the priest, and the priest didn't have jurisdiction over the king. So that's a conscious decision that you have to make. If you are compelled by your conscience to ultimately say, we will break the limit of 10, we'll have whatever, we'll be very careful, we'll do all the things and even more than what the secular operations are doing, we'll stand behind you. We're not telling you to do that. That is a personal, individual decision that you as a pastor and church leaders must make. We are representing some pastors around the country that have had to come to that same situation in various places in America.
Okay, that's good, Matt. Here's another question. I want to get a couple in here. This one is from here in Lancaster County, and it's saying we are likely in Lancaster County, and I'm sitting right on the edge of Lancaster. I'm in actually Berks County here, Pennsylvania, physically. But it says we are exploring the possibility of gathering in homes as we broadcast our sermons. And I'm assuming I'm reading into this. He says, how do we balance the public perception and our witness against practicing our constitutional right of assembly? So I'm going to suggest maybe that's another alternative. Can you have
that's an interesting
20 people in a home and be watching there, but not 20 people necessarily in the church?
You know, Sam, that is that's why these conferences are good. That is a very good suggestion as an additional alternative. You can have that where you have the different people, different cell groups around the community gathering in homes and still obviously, if you have a 10-person limit, still stay in that 10 persons, and you can have different homes that you would designate that would ultimately be those host homes where all that could be broadcast. That is an excellent alternative.
All right, that's good. I thought that was a good question as well. Here's another one. In Pennsylvania, when you go into the stores right now, you're supposed to have a face mask. Actually, Pastor Todd Johnson, we're seeing up at the top, who prayed, he had his on. He's in Philadelphia. Is that necessary for churches that regather?
Well, obviously, a pastor cannot do that. What we are suggesting is what we're suggesting, for example, the ushers have the doors of the church propped open so people don't have to, make it even safer than when you go to the grocery store. Have the doors propped open so people don't have to have their hands on the same door handle to open it up, or have an usher there with gloves. There's lots of different options that we put in those safety measures. And the usher can wear certainly the face mask. I wouldn't require everybody that comes to wear a face mask, but that's me. And different pastors and different churches may have different situations. Obviously, the pastor would have a hard time, I would think, wearing a face mask preaching. But I guess that would even be possible as well. That really is going to be up to the individual church, your particular location, and what you feel is best. Obviously, we want to do two things. It's important for us to meet. The Greek word ecclesia is assembly. The synagogue comes from the Greek word. It means a place of assembly. And different alternatives that we just talked about. Some people in the church, perhaps some people in the homes, different kinds of ways to begin that process to re-meet. But how you want to do some of those particulars, I wouldn't say it's mandatory, but we've given a number of options, some of which include the gloves and the mask, not necessarily for the people, however, that come, although some people will naturally want to do that. And I would encourage people, if you're uncomfortable, it's no problem. If you want to wear masks, gloves, feel free. Some of that is actually addressed in the information here, but I think clearly as it relates to the people who are serving, I think that's a different story. So I would have those individuals likely wear some protective, gloves and or mask while they're opening the door for people, or they're handing out an offering envelope so that people don't have them where they're touching multiple offering envelopes in the back of the pew. A lot of that's addressed in the bullet points.
Okay, Matt, one more. I know that Gary Dull, when he's going to give us an update on what he and about 20 other churches are going to be doing, this is one thing that I think they're having the list, but this was the question. Is it advisable that a church that decides to regather physically again, that they notify any local law enforcement that they are doing so, or, and I'll just stop. That was basically the question. Is that a good idea? Necessary? Not necessary?
I don't recommend that. I don't think it's necessary to do that. I don't think that you need to do that. So we've had that question come up before. It's not a recommendation that we provide and suggest that that be done.
Can I then, I don't think I have any other questions that are posed here. Wait a minute, here's another one just came up. If the idea of gathering in homes, like we just mentioned earlier, does that practice expose the homeowner to possible fines or prosecution, even though it may be on a Sunday morning, as an example, to watch a church service or with a life group setting, or that? Speak to that if you could. Sure.
If you have a county or some local government that says there's a complete lockdown in the county, and that includes neighbors not visiting neighbors, then yes, it would, or it could, if that county decided to take some kind of action. Typically what probably would happen is, and unfortunately we've seen this happen in other places where churches get a call from somebody. There's a lot of snitching that unfortunately is happening around the country. where people call. And so if you have 5, 6 cars parked out in front of a home, and then people realize, oh, there's a meeting going on in there, they may call, and it's possible you would get a visit. If you're in one of those kinds of counties with that kind of very repressive order, I don't think that they would cite you at that point. Typically, they would probably want to disperse you. But that is a possibility, certainly is. It's also a possibility for a church. If a church were to meet in a county that had 20 people in the church, and the county said you can only have 10, that is also a possibility. Typically what they have done is disperse, but we represent a pastor, like I said, in Virginia on Palm Sunday. They had 16 people in a 293 seat sanctuary, 6 people over the limit. And Governor Northam enforced that. And we're defending the pastor there, but we also have a federal lawsuit against the county or against the state. And that's the one where the Department of Justice weighed in our favor.
All right, Matt, thank you very much. We've reached the time. These are great questions. We've answered most of them that are on here. Ladies and gentlemen, you can talk to Matt. I'm not talk to him, but visit his site, lc.org. That's libertycounsel.org. And you will find those list of guidelines. Do take advantage of those. And remember, again, as Matt very clearly said, the church is a distinct jurisdiction from civil government. The command to worship and gather is a command of God. Civil government has no right to speak and jump into that setting. And so all that we're doing needs to be couched in our care for our people, our normal caution for their health and all of that. But at the end of the day, this is a matter of before God and us as church leaders, not before civil government. And Matt did not say this, but his, I'm going to say it, Matt, you can disagree with me if you say it, but the one question was, should we notify our local law enforcement? Well, Matt said not advisable. My perspective on that is this. To notify them that you're going to do it is one thing. To notify them with a request, can we, is different.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that, Matt?
I agree with that, Sam. We do not need permission from the government, even during a pandemic, to gather together to meet. That is coming directly from the Bible. It's a jurisdiction the government doesn't have, and it's a jurisdiction that the First Amendment has drawn the line in the sand and say, government, you do not have that jurisdiction, and you cannot cross that line. Now, we take measures to protect people, but the government has no authority, as I mentioned before, to dictate the manner and form of worship for any church, let alone a template across the entire county or the entire state.
All right, excellent. All right, Matt, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so very, very much for being with us today. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to shift gears here right now. I want to bring in right at the moment Kyle Johnson. Kyle is a corporate attorney for Brotherhood Mutual. And I've asked him to be on because as an insurer of churches, liability, all that kind of thing, there is an element there that may be, in fact, of interest. So Kyle Johnson, thank you for being with us. Take just a few moments, lay down a few guidelines, and then we'll do the same thing with any questions that you may have, those who are watching us, for Kyle. And again, if some of the questions we did not get to with Matt, I may try to come back at the end if we have time. So Kyle, you're on.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me a part of the call here. Like he said, I'm a corporate attorney at Brotherhood Mutual, and hopefully I can provide, some information on not only the insurance side of things, but also liability. Certainly Matt shared some good information, and some of that's, similar to what we would share at Brotherhood Mutual. For those of you that are familiar with us, maybe insured, maybe not, we have on our website what we refer to as a safety library, and that's several, risk management articles, resources, sample policies, and we've been continuing to build that related specifically to COVID-19. And more recently, developing a page that's focused on regathering or reopening, and what do we need to do to prepare for that. And so certainly I'll talk a little bit about that, but one of the common questions that we're getting, because we do have a service called Legal Assist, so we get a lot of questions from ministries in Pennsylvania and all over the country, is if we gather or when we gather, could we be held liable if someone gets sick? I think a lot of you probably are thinking about that, or if you're not, you probably should at least consider it. If someone comes to service, they get sick, what's our risk here? And certainly with everything we do, there's a risk of liability, right? Unless we close the doors and don't let anybody in, there's always some risk of liability. But I want to walk through this a little bit because, like I said, we're getting a lot of questions on this. And, I think that the possibilities there, I should point out before I go into this that I'm not licensed in Pennsylvania. I'm actually in Indiana. So what I can't do is offer a legal opinion on this, but I think these general principles will apply everywhere for the most part. Certainly as a church, we, like other property owners, we owe some duty of care to people that we invite onto our property. And, in order for someone to try to make that claim that you were negligent, right, that you owed them a duty, that you breached that duty and you caused their injury, it seems like it'd be a high hurdle there. And the reason why I say that specific to COVID-19 is because it's so widespread. It's everywhere. Obviously, some communities have higher amounts of cases than others, but I think it'd be really difficult to establish that you contracted it at a church gathering or a church service or activity. Food poisoning is a good example. That happens a lot faster, usually within a matter of a day or so, and it's hard to even show where you got that at. COVID-19, from what they're saying, can take up to 14 days, from when you contract it to when you show symptoms. And so I think it'd be very difficult to show that I got it at the church, but even if they did overcome that hurdle, a plaintiff did, they still would need to show that somehow you were negligent, right? That you breached that duty to them. And so, that there can be, fixed with just taking steps like Matt talked about and like we have on our website. Like I said, I can't guarantee that you're not going to be held liable in these situations, but if you're taking steps to keep people safe, you're looking at the guidance from your state and local health departments, the CDC and other resources, and saying, hey, how can we incorporate that into our activities and our services? I think you're going to be in a relatively safe position. One question out there, if you're familiar with something called negligence per se, because some churches are looking at, hey, we've been told we can't meet, but we're going to do it anyway. Are we more likely to be held liable because we're violating, an executive order? Because there's something called negligence per se that would say, hey, you violated the law and therefore you're automatically negligent. Generally that applies to stuff that's, passed by the legislatures and not so much executive orders. Some would argue that the executive branch of the government doesn't even have the right to pass laws or initiate these things. And so generally negligence per se is probably not going to apply. But like I said, it's good to be aware of those. And like I said, make an informed decision for your ministry specifically as to whether we meet, how many people we're going to gather. I think it's important to take all that into consideration. One of the questions that I'm sure many of you are thinking too is, if we get sued, are we going to have coverage? Are we going to be covered for this? And certainly I can't speak for other insurers. Like I said, I'm with Brotherhood Mutual Insurance Company. But on a general note, most of you probably have general liability insurance, whoever your carrier is. And usually that's going to be intended to defend you as the insured against claims of bodily injury, which in most cases includes sickness. Those are probably the most likely types of claims that might come up. That, like I mentioned earlier, I got sick because you didn't take precautions. You invited me in. I came, I got sick, it's your fault. Generally, your insurer is going to be able to defend you in that case and probably even indemnify you for bodily injury claims. Now, I wish I could tell you, hey, if you're with Brotherhood Mutual, every claim's covered, but of course, the attorney in me has to say, that coverage is determined at the time of a claim, because I don't want to tell you you're covered, and then there's specific facts that are covered. But generally speaking, general liability insurance covers bodily injury, including sickness. And so probably most of those claims, or at least you're going to have a defense. And what I would say is check with your agent, check with your insurer. One of the things that Sam and I talked about prior to this is, are there any restrictions or requirements that your insurer has? Brotherhood Mutual isn't saying that you need to social distance, you need to wear masks, take temperatures in order to have coverage. There's nothing like that, but I can't say that other insurers don't have those types of things. Certainly we have recommendations on our website from a risk management perspective that would say, hey, these are good things to do to help keep your people safe and meet safely, but not a condition of coverage there, that if you don't do these, you don't have coverage. And so like Matt mentioned on our website, we have a list of things. We've got articles on, social, reducing touching. And the nice thing about these resources is you can go to the CDC, you can go to your health department, but they're probably not geared toward ministries and churches. And we're trying to provide, context for the ministry setting as far as how you do that. And so, some ideas, I won't go through all of them, but maybe to, start off with one service, maybe a lower number of people. For churches that have multiple services, some are even considering spacing out the time. Maybe we have a 9 and 11 o'clock, but we need a little more time between to make sure that we can clean in there, reducing touching. A lot of churches are removing hymnals and other stuff that would be in the pews or on their chairs just to reduce the number of things that are touching and need cleaned. Children's ministry, that's another question of, do we have children's ministry initially? Maybe you don't. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but obviously it's a lot harder to get children not to touch things and put in these safeguards. And so a lot of churches are considering starting off slow and maybe not having children's ministry initially. A lot of different ideas, a lot of good ideas out there that you should consider, but make sure they're geared toward your ministry specifically, because everyone's building's different, everyone's congregation's different. It's important to just gear it toward your ministry. And then the last thing I'll share is communication. It's really helpful if you can communicate these things ahead of time to your people, to know here's what to expect when you come to church. Here are the things that we're going to be doing, and prepare them so that when they come, they're not surprised by the fact that they can only come in one entrance, or maybe you're spacing out the parking lot. Maybe you're taking temperatures. I'm not saying you need to do that or should do that, but it's good that they know that that's going to happen when they come, and probably also encouraging those who are sick, who have symptoms, not to come. And then if you can provide alternatives like online services or other things, that's great as well. But if you go to brotherhoodmutual.com, you'll see a big red banner at the top that says COVID-19 resources. If you click that, we've got a lot of articles out there to offer. So I'd encourage you to check that out. And if you don't find answers there, we also offer a service called Legal Assist, where you can ask legal questions, risk management questions, and one of our attorneys can provide some risk management guidance to you.
All right, Kyle, that's excellent. And you, in my opinion, you did a good job of anticipating questions and directing them. None of those that I have on the list, and again, all of you who are watching, if you have a question, go down to the Q&A on the bottom of the screen and present the questions. And I'm reviewing these, and I have incorporated almost all of them, except for one, which we'll deal with just a little bit after Gary's done here in just a moment. But I think we've dealt with all of them, but you've anticipated a lot, Kyle. And again, your website, brotherhoodmutual.com, you have some of the guidelines that you just mentioned there. And you also said that you have a legal assist piece of the equation. If those of you who are watching would want to have any kind of a direct question that you may want to pose, Kyle has offered to be able to address that. So I think Josh has put up on the screen, is that your website there, Kyle? So you get a sense of it, those who are watching, that's what you'll see when you go to their website, but they're very helpful. And Kyle, thank you so much for being with us today. Great addition and a great help. So take care. We'll talk to you later. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
All right, we're going to shift gears here right now, and we're doing very well time-wise. And so I just want to thank everybody that's here. I want to go to Gary Dahl right now. Most of you are on the call, and again, I don't know how many are here. We've got well, a lot of folks on the line here, on the watching here right now. Gary Dahl pastors a church in Altoona, Pennsylvania, Faith Baptist Church of Altoona. He's a co-host on our Stand in the Gap Today radio program, if you've watched that. And he's also the executive director of our Pennsylvania Pastors Network. But Gary, that's all. I can say a lot more about you, but I don't need to at the moment.
Fine.
But you have taken the lead and been a part of an effort with a number of pastors in Southwest Pennsylvania. You've walked through a lot of these things already, and I just thought it would be very helpful in a practical sense now. Talk to a pastor on the ground, what you guys have done, what are you going to do, share what you are able to share, in principle form anyways. You know what I'm talking about, but I think it would be very helpful to our viewers here right now.
Okay, Sam, thank you. And I think this is a great webinar, and I do appreciate what both Kyle and Matt have said. Very good information given. Well, what has taken place here in our part of the country is we are really, according to the state stipulation, we are in what is called South Central Pennsylvania. And so several weeks ago, a group of pastors got together from Bedford County, Blair County, and Huntington County to talk about a time when we might be able to open up our churches, as it were. And of course, we believe, along with what Matt has said, that the church needs to function. Hebrews 10:25 tells us that we are not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together. And we've been doing that. Churches all across the country and around the world have been doing that, and it has detrimental effects. And some of those detrimental effects, of course, Matt shared with our group, and I think it was good to hear that. Well, we've been meeting on a regular basis, weekly, and we have actually set a date in which we are going to open up. And I'm not going to give that date here on the webinar because of the process that we've put together. And what we are going to do is meet one more time, and that will be tomorrow afternoon. The pastors who are part of this coalition, we're going to be meeting tomorrow afternoon by way of phone conference and sort of dot all the I's and cross all the T's. And then we will be announcing to our individual churches on Friday when we are going to have that open date. Now, let me say that later on, after we announce it to our individual churches, we are going to do something that has been discussed already, and that is we're going to contact our local authorities. And we're doing that not to ask for permission. Sam, what you brought out and what Matt brought out is absolutely true. We as churches do not need to ask permission to the government to open our services. And so we're not going to ask permission, but neither do we need to ask permission here in Pennsylvania. The thing that we need to recognize is that in Pennsylvania, the governor never told churches to close. He recommended it. Our Secretary of Health, Rachel Levine, agreed to that, but they've actually stated that churches in Pennsylvania are life-supporting entities. Think of that. We have a liberal government in Pennsylvania, but they recognize that, and I really believe that that's an answer to prayer. So we were never told to close, therefore we never need to ask for permission to open. But we are going to contact our local authorities and let them know what we are going to do, just for the sake of communication, not for permission-wise, but for communication-wise. And then later on, we will also inform the local news agencies as to what we are going to do. Again, the entire purpose is to keep it before the leaders of our community, to keep it before our community, so that they might know exactly what we are going to do. Now, one of the things that I might mention is that it's very important to our churches when we open up to make sure that we follow all the guidelines that are stipulated to maintain safety. And I know that we're mainly here in Pennsylvania. So with churches that are in the red zone within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, it will be absolutely important that they keep the social distancing recommendation 6 feet being apart. That may not be necessary in other zones, but it certainly is recommended within the red zones. But when the people come in, what we are going to do, we are encouraging our pastors to set up a situation whereby when people come on to the church lot, they are directed to what doors to enter. In our particular facility, we're going to bring them in at 3 separate doors. There will be people there to meet them, to greet them, and even take them to various locations within the sanctuary to sit so that they can participate. And like I said, all of the health safety measures will be taken. Masks will be worn. We will have the thermometers to check the temperature of those who are entering. We'll ask all the pertinent questions and so forth. One of the things that we need to take into consideration is that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there is no limit as to how many can gather in the church. We really don't need to be concerned about the 10 or the 20 amount because no stipulation has been given to the church. So if we want to have, well, I suppose we can have as many as we want, but it's important that we follow all the safety guidelines that's possible in order to protect our people. You know, Sam, when they started talking about closing churches, I was one who said, the government's not going to tell me to do that. In fact, what our deacons and staff did, we came up with a statement that we are going to close churches, not because the government's telling us, but rather we want to protect our people. And that's why we did what we did. In fact, what we said is that the church is closed, but the doors are open. And which means that we did all of our services virtually and radio and television and so forth. But if somebody wanted to come into the church service, we did not refuse them. We allowed them to come in. And it's been a blessing, to be honest with you. But the fact of the matter is, when we do open on that stipulated day, we are going to make sure that every possible safety precaution is taken to take care of our people. We don't want anybody within our congregation saying that they came down with COVID-19 here. Well, and beyond that, we just don't want to contribute to that. So those are just a couple of things. And by the way, when we open, I'm going to invite some of our elected officials to participate. I think that will be good to show the relationship between the church and the elected officials.
Okay, Gary, excellent. I'm going to hold a couple of questions that I have. I want to go to Brother Denny Mallonee now. Denny, you're up in the middle part of Pennsylvania, Beaver Springs area, and you also you're the general manager of WFBM Radio, and a lot of people in the middle part of the state, maybe in some listening right now or being a part of it, listen to some of your stations. So anyways, if you don't know Denny, this is that guy that's behind that radio. But Denny, what are you doing? You don't have to go into the kind of detail that Gary just did. I'll come back and ask some questions, but what are you doing? Have you made a decision as your church? And if so, how are you putting that into effect?
Okay, I don't want to be redundant. I'll just say ditto to what Gary said. And of course, we do have the advantage of radio. We do live streaming as well. We have not locked the doors, and we've had some folks trickle in, sitting safely apart. We kind of came up with safety measures need to be in place. Now, to really open up, we will stipulate the guidelines as been recommended. We've already had them written down here, and I really appreciate what Mat Staver had to say, and also for Carl Johnson. Very good advice. Talking to a lot of pastors in the area, they've gone to parking lot services, and most of them have had record attendances. They may not want to go back the other way because of that. You know, folks are assembling, they have to stay in their vehicles, and we may have a little of that too when we officially open the doors per se. But safety measures in place following the guidelines that we have them stipulated. And this is what I've been sharing as far as advice goes to other pastors in our area. And then sanitize everything. Our custodial people have sanitized the pews and everything, even though folks haven't even been in there. They sanitize everything everybody can touch. we have hand sanitizers in all the pews, and we've done that for several years. And we can say we're saved and sanitized. So, we have that in place. And the social distancing, we need to keep people apart as much as possible. And we are planning to practice that. We have been practicing that. And one of the cautions, and I agree that it is up to us. We're in a yellow zone starting Friday, I guess, from what we have heard. So there may be less restrictions, although the governor's been so vague on some of them. We really don't know what's going to happen until we hear from him. Some of our adjacent counties are still considered red, and they'll have more restrictions. But we do believe Hebrews 10:25 about not forsaking the assembling of yourselves together. We believe that is important to assemble, and we believe our testimony is important. And, there will be people who may think, oh, they don't care about people's health. We want to ensure that we do, and I think it's very important that we state that and make that known. And so I guess I'll stop with that unless you have another question.
Okay, I may come back and ask a general one. Thank you, Denny. And let me go to Todd Johnson. Todd, you opened this in prayer. You're in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is one of the hotter spots theoretically in the state. What are you doing, and what are other churches, for instance, in Philadelphia doing?
Many of the churches are closed. Some have opened. Some never closed. They never. In my particular case, we have always been meeting throughout the pandemic. We usually have between 10 and 15 people. We practice social distancing. We all wear masks. We sanitize the church. So in our particular case, we never stopped or discontinued the public gathering. But the one person who got sick, by the way, Sam, one of the ladies from our church, she got COVID-19. She was one of the people who was not coming to church. She opted not to come, she and her husband, but she works in a hospital, and thusly she got sick. So it's interesting that the one person who got sick was a person who was not attending on Sunday morning. But in Philadelphia, as you know, because of the population size, and we have a lot of nursing homes and a lot of elderly. So there have been a lot of cases where people have gotten sick throughout the city of Philadelphia. But thankfully, the Lord has kept us. There's a church down the street from us. They have been meeting and practicing safe mitigation as it relates to social distancing and wearing masks and so forth. So every church is taking it individually how they want to conduct themselves. But fortunately, and by prayer, we have not had any illness or any, we haven't even had anybody report us and say, oh, they're going to call, I think Matt mentioned earlier, Mat Staver, about people snitching. We haven't even had that. We've had one person who attended our service. He was a police officer who was off duty, couldn't go to his church, and came to our, because he wanted to go to a live worship, and he came and visited our church.
That's great. That's great, Todd. All righty. Well, that's good. Well, I have a couple of questions that came up that are on the list I want to pose. They tie in as we wrap up here. And a couple of them, Gary, I want to ask you because you raised the question. I want to see to what extent you are going to go on them. But here is this first one. This is Brother Jeff, and he said he pastors two churches, one in Bedford and one in Huntington County. Not aware of what you are doing. Gary, could he get in contact with you and the other group of pastors to which you referred? Can I just pass along to him your email?
Yes, absolutely. And we would be more than delighted to have him involved. And you give him the email and he can contact me, and I'll give him the appropriate contact information. And
if any of you are listening right now, and I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot because you're so busy, but if there are any pastors who are listening now and would want to have a further conversation with you or Denny or you, Brother Todd from Philadelphia, do I have your permission to, if they ask, to pass along your email or phone numbers to any of those who ask me?
Yes, that's fine with me. That's great.
Okay.
That's
all of you are watching right now. You heard that. If you've got a question for Denny or for Gary, or for Brother Todd Johnson from Philadelphia on any regard, just touch base with them or a question, pose it here in this forum or send it to me. I'm not going to give all of this out live to everybody at this point, but you can contact me or give me a question right now and I will get that information and their contacts to you. Okay, Gary, you raised a question where about following guidelines, certain doors to enter and so forth. But this I got to quiz you on. You talked about taking temperatures. Are you literally going to take the temperature of people when they come into the service?
Yeah, because we've been following the stipulations or the guidelines set up by the Christian Law Association, David Gibbs. And that's one of the things that they recommend. And, you can get these thermometers that you just pointed at the head of the individual and it registers their temperature. And so we're going to do that. In fact, they have already been ordered and we will have somebody at each one of the entrances into our sanctuary to take the people's temperatures. And again, we're communicating to all of our people. We've put a list of guidelines that we will be setting out to our congregation as to what to expect when they do show up. So we're in the process of doing that as guided by the Christian Law Association.
All right. So again, all of you are listening is basically back what Matt was saying. Is it something that because Gary and the pastors out there have chosen to do that, is that something that you need to take a scan of temperatures? Is that something that you need to do? The answer would be no, you don't need to do it. Okay. And that's, again, back to Matt, there's a fundamental principle undergirding this. There are guidelines, but there are certain basic things that fall within the context of the church. If some of these things that are there, like the mask, for instance, that was a question that came up and that was answered. Okay, if you don't wear a mask, you don't wear a mask. If you feel comfortable doing it, then do it. So there is a range of options. I think Matt made that clear. I think Kyle put that in there, and I believe that's what we're saying that's being recommended across the spectrum, because there is no law on these things, on any of these things. Use common sense, pray about them, and if it is a practice that you feel inclined to do that your people are not used to, then do communicate ahead of time to them so they are aware, so they're not caught by surprise. I think all of that has been kind of incorporated into what we're saying. Do that. Now, there's another question that's come up here, and we didn't cover it with Matt, so I'll just put it out there. Some churches I know, when they are gathering in the social distancing practice, are doing it, but doing it by families, because the social distancing rule guidelines don't apply to families. So have a family sit together, and they can sit as close as they want to because that's the way they are. And then between the families, then you can have your distance. Gary, is that something that you and your guys talked about? Is that what you're going to do?
Yes, we've talked about that. And again, we are encouraging that. And again, keep in mind, these are all guidelines and suggestions simply because of the fact that the state of Pennsylvania has not come down upon the churches with any particular stipulation. Mm-hmm. We are simply doing these for two reasons. Number one, to protect our own people. I didn't mention this earlier, but I will bring it out now. We waited here a while before we actually made the decision to so-called close. Our doors were always open, but we waited a while. But what really, Sam, got me to come to the conclusion to do what we did was I did not want to be responsible for giving anybody COVID-19. So that's what directed us to go the way we did here at our church. Therefore, when we open, we are going to follow those guidelines that have been stipulated for the safety of our own people, not because we are being told to do it. But then the other side of it too, Sam, is we want to have a good relationship with our local authorities, whether it's the police or the elected officials and even the community. In the event that we would have somebody sort of slip in who is not necessarily a member of our congregation as a mole to see what we're going to do, we want to make certain that we're doing everything that has us above board, going above and beyond the call of duty, as it were, to maintain the safety of our people. We don't want anybody to have to say, well, look at what those folks did. They violated this and they violated that. We want to have a good testimony for the Lord Jesus Christ. So, yeah, we're going to encourage people to wear masks if they want. We're going to take the temperature. If somebody refuses to do it, we're not going to make them do it.
Okay, and that was a question right there. I'm going to interrupt with you because that goes exactly with several questions that are here and very practical. And I thought about this, Gary, when you said, all right, you're going to do that when people come in or however it is. What if someone says, well, frankly, Mr. Usher, I don't want my temperature taken. All right, what are you going to do? What's going to be the response? Have you thought that through?
That's fine. Basically, probably what we will tell our people to say is, well, we are doing this not only to protect you, but to protect others. And we would encourage you to do it. If they absolutely refuse to do it, then that's up to them.
Okay, so you'll revert to the individual freedom of the individual, but recommend a practice that the leadership is comfortable with.
Right,
Okay.
right. We will. I want to throw something else in too. I meant to mention earlier and I forgot. Matt implied it, and I think so did Kyle. In opening, the day that we've decided, we're only going to open our morning services, Sam. We're not doing anything with Sunday school children's meetings. We're not doing an evening service, and we're not doing midweek service. We're going to continue to use social media on those, but we are going to just open our 10:30 service. And just to make that clear. There's something else I want to clarify too. The guidelines that have been given to us by the Christian Law Association make the statement that it's up to the leadership of the local church to make the final decision as to when they're going to open and how they're going to operate. Now, those churches that are involved with us here in South Central Pennsylvania are all independent churches, not members of a larger denomination. It could very well be that if you are part of a Methodist group or a Presbyterian group or some larger denomination where you've got outside authorities, as it were, you know, pastors would probably be wise to contact their authorities, their leadership, I'll put it that way. The principles that we have designed relate basically to the independent church that is guided by the independent leadership and the independent congregation. So I just wanted to make that clear. That's something that some people may want to think through.
All right, Gary, that's very helpful. Boy, we're about out of time. Somebody did want to know here, Gary. Can you give the website of where you ordered the thermometers from? How can they find it? If you don't have it right on the tip of your tongue,
Have them email me, Sam. We can give them the information. There's
okay,
2 or 3 different places.
Gary,
out
if you don't mind, why don't you just give your email address right now for people, because there's several want to contact you. So
fbc@fbcaltoona.org. That's fbc@fbcaltoona.org. And any questions that they might have, they can send them there. fbc@fbcaltoona.org.
Okay. All right. We're just about wrapped up on time here. I'm thinking how here Pastor Jim asked this question. I don't know if we can get it done. He said, what will you do if somebody has a high temperature?
If they have a high temperature, then we are going to probably encourage them not to come in. I mean, just for the safety.
Okay. All right. And I would submit this for everybody as well, and even for you guys, Gary, and so forth, because the number of what constitutes a temperature of concern, has been adjusted a couple of times by the CDC. If somebody's going to make a determination, all I'm saying is think through so you know what it is. 100.4, 100, whatever. And if you, I'm just saying this generally as we wrap up, if you do put a policy into place, then do think through how you're going to respond if, in fact, something shows. Like you're going to tell somebody you can't come in. And what if somebody says, well, I frankly don't want to listen to you. I want to come in anyway. Okay, you have a potential problem to the same extent like if we don't wear a mask and we go into the local Walmart and somebody says, hey, you have to have a mask on. And then we have to say, well, all right, then what are we going to do? So all I'm thinking, when we lay down a policy, try to think it through as best as possible of what happens if there's pushback, because there just may be. So if you're putting your ushers in a position of whatever it is, if they are the contact point, you're also potentially making them a police officer on a local level in your setting. Make sure that's all aware and thought out so that they know how to handle. Otherwise, you could encounter a circumstance that becomes the exact opposite that you want to have. So all of that needs to be a part of what leadership thinks through as putting these kinds of things into place. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I said we would be on time and careful of your time. It is now 10 after. This is our moment here. And so we're going to wrap it up. This program has been recorded. We will put a link probably on our website. And I don't know if we will send it out to everybody who got the invite to the program. We may. We may do that. And if we do, we'll put in the link to Liberty Counsel that you saw with Matt, and we'll put in a link to Matt from Brotherhood Mutual, and I would say perhaps at that point, guys, Denny and Todd and Gary, since you gave permission, people want to contact you, I may just include your email at the bottom of that so that they can get a hold of you guys that way as well. Okay. All right. That being the case, thank you all for being with us. Let me close in prayer. Let's ask God's blessing on this, and we'll go from here. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this medium of communication. Thank you for all these scores of people that have been on this call from across the state. The questions, the concern, of all who have represented here. Lord, I pray for great wisdom to be given to our pastors, our church leadership, not just here in Pennsylvania, but across the country in these days of increasing challenge. And Lord, I just pray that we would all think in terms that what we are working through here in this matter, or even in taking the money from the CARES Act, or these are things that are practice runs for increasing challenges that are going to come into our space as pastors, as church leaders, because of the very nature of where government and civil authority is going. Help us to understand, walk through these on biblical principles, understanding how these things are put together. Guide us, Lord, protect us. May our people be able to gather again physically so that we can do and maximize exactly what you've commanded the church to do. And we put all this before you, and we commit all those on this call into your safekeeping, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, thank you all for being a part of the program today. God bless you, and we are available. Go to our website, give us a question if you want, AmericanPastorsNetwork.net. You can contact us, and we'll follow up and answer any questions that we didn't cover in this program today. So God bless you. We'll see you later.